Mafia boss saw his maid eating alone in rain and crying. What he did next was shocking. The rain in Port Harridan, Virginia, didn't just fall, it attacked. It came in off the Atlantic in hard, silvery sheets, trying to drown the city in shadow and salt. Tonight, it was succeeding. The wharf lights of the fabricated shipping town were blurred halos, bleeding into the slick, black water of the harbor. The camera of the mind would sweep past the empty cranes, past the skeletal ribs of the loading docks, and climb the stone-slick roads up to the highest point of the bluff. There, crouched against the storm, was the Vitali mansion. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress of dark stone and unforgiving angles, a statement of power that glared down at the port Marco Vitali owned, body and soul. And on the edge of its grand covered terrace, just outside the glowing warmth of the kitchens, I sat. My name is Naya Calderon. I was the new maid, and I was trying to eat garbage. It was leftovers, technically. Scraps from the staff meal I'd missed because I'd spent an hour scrubbing a wine stain no one else could see. Now it was cold congealed pasta in a plastic container, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the fork. The cold was part of it. The thin fabric of my uniform was useless against the wind that whipped water under the awning. But the real tremor came from deeper inside. My eyes were swollen tight, aching from the tears I'd shed 20 minutes ago. The phone call had been brutal. A man with a voice like gravel and false sympathy, claiming to be from the Aurelia Relief Trust. He'd said my mother's experimental treatment required an immediate $5,000 payment, or they would regretfully remove her from the program by morning. I didn't have $5,000. I didn't even have $500. I had this cold pasta and a job that paid just enough to keep my tiny apartment in Spindle Row from being boarded up. I had argued, I had pleaded, I had explained that I'd already paid for the month. He had simply repeated the amount, his voice losing its sympathy and gaining an edge that made my stomach turn to ice. I was trying to force down a bite, telling myself I needed the energy. When the sound of the rain changed, it was eclipsed by the low, predatory purr of an engine cutting through the storm. Headlights sliced across the terrace, freezing me like an animal. A black coupe, low and sleek as a panther, ghosted to a stop on the circular drive. The engine died, plunging the driveway back into a heavy, dripping silence. The driver's door opened. Marco Vitali emerged. I had only seen him from a distance. He was a legend in the house, a ghost in a tailored suit. The staff spoke of him in whispers, the man who controlled every ship that moved in or out of Port Harridan, the man who held the city's debts in a closed fist. He was wearing a black trench coat, the collar turned up against the rain. He looked more like a film star from the 1940s than a criminal. He moved with an economy of motion, an absolute stillness that seemed to repel the chaos of the storm. He hadn't seen me. I pressed myself flatter against the stone wall, hoping to blend into the shadows. He took 2 steps toward the massive front doors, then stopped. His head turned. He hadn't missed me. He missed nothing. I watched, frozen, as he stood perfectly still, just looking at me. I couldn't see his expression in the gloom, only his silhouette against the rain-washed light of the house. He turned his body fully toward me and began to walk, not to the front door, but to the terrace. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was I breaking a rule? Was I not allowed to be here? My plastic container suddenly felt like a bomb. He stopped a few feet away. The rain was catching the shoulders of his coat, making the expensive wool shine. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled off his black leather gloves, 1 finger at a time. Then, he reached back into the open car door and produced a large, black umbrella. He snapped it open with a sharp thwack that cut through the sound of the rain. He stepped onto the terrace, closing the distance between us. He angled the umbrella, and suddenly, the hard drumming of the rain against my head and shoulders stopped. He was shielding me. I was huddled on the ground, and he was standing over me, a tall, dark mountain of quiet power. I risked a look up. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, his eyes dark and unreadable. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at the container of cold pasta in my lap. His voice, when it came, was low, not loud, but it resonated, cutting through the wind. "Who made you eat in the rain?" It wasn't a question of concern. It was a question of fact, an inquiry. I flinched, my eyes dropping back to the pasta. "No one, sir. It's fine. I missed dinner." "It's fine," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. He said nothing for a long moment. The only sound was the storm battering the umbrella he held over me. I could smell the faint, expensive scent of his coat wool, leather, and something clean, like ozone from the storm itself. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't tell me to get up. He simply turned his head slightly toward the kitchen entrance, where a shaft of warm light cut into the night. He made a small, sharp gesture with his gloved hand, a signal. A moment later, the kitchen door opened, and one of the chefs peered out, his eyes wide with confusion, then terror, as he saw Mr. Vitali. "Open the west dining room," Marco said. His voice was just as quiet, but the chef snapped to attention as if a gun had been fired. "Sir." "The west room, now." He retracted the umbrella and snapped it closed, water spraying onto the stones. He didn't look at me. He just started walking toward the staff entrance. "Come." It was a command, not an invitation. I scrambled to my feet, dumping the pasta into a nearby planter, my fingers numb and clumsy. I followed his broad back into the warmth and light of the house, trailing rainwater onto the pristine marble floors. He led me through the gleaming, silent expanse of the main kitchen, past the stunned staff, and into a room I had never seen, the west dining room. It was smaller than the grand hall, but still impossibly opulent, dominated by a dark mahogany table that could seat 20. It was dark, but the chef, scurrying ahead, flicked on a set of low, golden sconce lights. "Sit," Marco said, gesturing to the head of the table. I sat. The velvet-upholstered chair felt ridiculously soft. I felt like a stray dog being seated at a king's table. Marco spoke to the chef in rapid, low Italian. The chef nodded and vanished. Marco Vitali loosened his tie and unbuttoned his trench coat, but he did not take it off. He sat not at the opposite end of the table, but 3 chairs down from me, a position of casual, observable power. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't read anything. He just sat, his hands resting on the polished wood, and watched the rain lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence was deafening, broken only by the clock on the mantelpiece ticking, tick-tock, tick. Minutes later, the chef returned, carrying a heavy silver tray. He placed it in front of me. The aroma hit me, and my stomach clenched with a hunger so sharp it was painful. It was a thick, perfectly cooked porterhouse steak surrounded by roasted vegetables and a small loaf of steaming bread. "Eat," Marco said. The chef returned again, placing a single, steaming cup of black coffee in front of Mr. Vitale. Then he was gone, and we were alone again. I picked up the heavy silver fork. My hands were still shaking, but for a different reason now. I cut a small piece of steak. It was tender, warm, and melted in my mouth. I closed my eyes, and the sheer relief of it, the warmth after the biting cold, was too much. But it wasn't the food that broke me. It was my phone. It vibrated on the table, a harsh, buzzing noise against the wood. I looked at it, and the screen lit up. Unknown caller. My breath hitched. They were calling again. The Aurelia Relief Trust, the gravel-voiced man, the $5,000 threat. I quickly reached out and pressed the button to silence it, my face burning with shame. I didn't want him to see this. I didn't want him to know how pathetic my life was. But the vibration had broken the dam. A sob, hot and thick, tore its way out of my throat. I pressed my hands to my mouth, but it was too late. The tears I'd been holding back all night came, hot and fast, dripping onto the silver plate. I was crying over a Mafia boss's steak. Marco Vitali's gaze snapped from the window to my phone, then to my face. His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed, becoming sharp, analytical. The phone buzzed again, insistent. "Who is it?" he asked. "It's nothing," I choked out, wiping my face. "A mistake." He didn't believe me. He reached across the chairs, his arm moving with that same fluid speed. He didn't grab the phone. He simply placed his hand next to it, palm up. "Give it to me." "Sir, please, it's not—" "Give me the phone, Naya." He knew my name. The realization hit me with the force of a slap. He, the owner of this fortress, knew the name of his newest, lowest-ranking maid. My hand trembled as I slid the phone across the polished wood. He picked it up as the third call came through. He answered it. He didn't put it on speaker. He just held it to his ear, his dark eyes fixed on me. "Yes," he said, his voice neutral. I could hear the faint, tinny squawk of the man on the other end. Starting his script, Marco listened for about 10 seconds. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is this the Aurelia Relief Trust?" he interrupted. His voice was different now. It was lower, smoother, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the voice that commanded the port. He listened again. "I see. My name is Marco Vitali. You will not be calling this number again. The matter of Mrs. Calderon's treatment is now my concern. From this point forward, you will speak to me, and only to me. Do you understand?" There was a pause. I imagined the gravel-voiced man sputtering on the other end. "I will not repeat myself," Marco said, and with a final, chilling click, he ended the call. He placed the phone on the table, screen down. I was staring at him, my breath caught in my chest, the tears frozen on my face. He stood up, shrugging off his heavy trench coat. The suit beneath was dark, immaculate, and probably worth more than my mother's fraudulent medical bills. He draped the coat, his coat, the one that smelled like power and ozone, over my shoulders. It was incredibly heavy and blessedly warm, enveloping me. "You're done for the night," he said, his voice back to that neutral, commanding tone. "My driver will take you home." He gestured to the door. I stood up, clutching the coat around me. The plate, sir." "Leave it, Lena." He walked me to the front hall, where a man in a black suit, his driver, was already waiting, holding an umbrella. "Mister." Vitali spoke to him in that same low Italian, too fast for me to understand. The driver nodded, his eyes meeting mine for only a brief, respectful second. "He will take you to Spindle Row," Marco said to me. "Go straight inside." I nodded, speechless. Clutching his coat, I walked out into the rain, but this time I was shielded. As I got into the warm, dark sedan, I looked back. Marco Vitali was standing in the doorway, watching me. As the car pulled away, I saw another nondescript black car pull out from a side street, its headlights off, falling in a few car lengths behind us. He hadn't just sent me home. He had sent me home with an escort. Marco watched the red taillights of the sedan disappear into the sheets of rain. He turned and walked back into his silent house. He went to his study, a room of dark woods and glass that overlooked the raging harbor. He stood at the window, watching the rain. It wasn't just water anymore. It looked like needles, like tiny, silver knives, all aimed at the city. Someone had used his house as a backdrop for cruelty. Someone had made one of his people. It didn't matter how new. She was his eat scraps in a storm. Someone had insulted his home, not with a threat, but with the assumption that he wouldn't notice, that he wouldn't care. He turned from the window and sat at his massive desk. He didn't turn on a computer. He opened a thick, leather-bound journal. He uncapped a heavy, old-fashioned fountain pen. He paused for a moment, the only sound in the room the low thrum of a hidden jazz record and the relentless drumming of the rain. Then, in sharp black ink, he wrote the first entry for this new affair. Who profits from hunger? The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky over Port Harridan remained a bruised, heavy gray. I sat in my study, the leather-bound journal open on the desk. The ink from last night was dry. Who profits from hunger? That girl, Naya, the image of her huddled on the stone, her thin shoulders shaking, hadn't left me. It wasn't pity I felt. It was a cold, precise anger. My fortress had been breached, not by force, but by a rot that had crept inside. My first move was always to clean my own house. I spent the first 2 hours of the day with my internal payroll ledgers. I expected to find skimming, wage deductions, something crude, but the books were immaculate. Every hour accounted for, every wage paid exactly to the cent. The problem was not in what I paid them, it was in what was being taken. I moved to the secondary systems, benefits, gratuities. Many of the staff, especially those who worked the private dinners and functions I hosted, received electronic tips for the last 6 months. At the suggestion of my fiancé, Verity Sloan, we had been using a modern, transparent application called Tip Halo. I traced the flow of that digital river. I saw the small amounts, $20, $50, sometimes $100, all pooling into the Tip Halo system. But they didn't go directly to the staff accounts. They were first routed through a third-party clearinghouse, a company called Hallow and Company Processing. And from there, the money trail went dark. I pulled the original vendor contract for Tip Halo. Verity had presented it herself. She had been bright, efficient, and convincing. "It streamlines everything, Marco," she'd said, smiling that smile she saved for television cameras. Total transparency. I looked at the signature page, the authorization. It was my name, scrawled in black ink, but it wasn't my hand. It was a competent forgery, but it lacked the specific weight I put on the final loop of the O. It was the signature of someone in a hurry. I summoned Orrin Beck. Orrin had been my personal assistant for 3 years before I moved him to the soft law division of my organization, the part that handled shipping manifests and city permits. He was smart, but weak. He entered my study looking like a man already condemned. He knew why he was here. I didn't waste time. I slid the contract across the polished wood. My signature, Orrin, tell me about it. He stared at it, his face pale. He licked his lips. "Mr. Vitale, it was a busy quarter. We had the port expansion." "Orrin," my voice was quiet. "Look at it." He flinched. Miss Sloan said it was just for efficiency, that you were tied up with the wharf negotiations, and she needed it signed to get the system implemented quickly. She said you'd already approved it verbally. She told you to sign my name." It was a statement, not a question. "She said it was to expedite the process, sir, a minor vendor contract." A minor contract? This app, I could already tell, was skimming a percentage, maybe 5%, maybe 10%, enough to be felt, but not enough to cause a revolt. "You're dismissed, Orrin." He practically ran from the room. He was a symptom, not the disease. I found Verity in the East Wing solarium, bathed in the weak morning light. She was on the phone, coordinating a charity luncheon, all gloss and polished energy. She finished her call and turned to me, her smile bright and practiced. "Marco, darling, you missed breakfast." She came forward, adjusting the lapel of my jacket. "You look tired." "Hallow and Company Processing." I said, I didn't move. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes, for just a fraction of a second, went completely still. It was the only tell I needed. "What about it?" she asked, her tone light. "It's the processor for Tip Halo. I'm looking into their fee structure. It seems excessive." She gave a perfect, theatrical little laugh. "Darling, are you accusing me of overpaying a vendor? You told me to handle the staff upgrades. If there's an issue with a fee, I'll have my assistant look into it. Please, don't be coarse about such minor accounting." She placed a cool, manicured hand on my chest. Her denial was flawless. It was a performance, and it confirmed everything. "Of course," I said, covering her hand with my own. "My mistake. Handle it." I left her there, among the flowers. I returned to my study and picked up the secure line, the one that never appeared on any bill, the one that routed through 3 separate, encrypted servers. "Activate Harbor Light." I said. The Harbor Light Bureau was my creation. It was not muscle. It was my scalpel. A privately funded, utterly deniable team of data analysts, forensic accountants, and surveillance experts. They existed on paper as a maritime logistics consultancy. In reality, they were my eyes and ears, and they saw everything. The target is Hallow and Company Processing. I told the handler, I want the money trail, from intake to final destination. I want to know who gets rich. I didn't have to wait long. Harbor Light didn't sleep. It took them less than 6 hours. The money from Hallow and Company was a ghost. It passed through half a dozen shell corporations, from the Cayman Islands to Delaware. Before finally coming to rest, it was washed, bleached, and reinvested into the primary development fund of the Kincaid Urban Group. Ephraim Kincaid. The name landed on my desk like a block of ice. Councilman Ephraim Kincaid, the man with the plastic smile, the greedy, grasping hands, and the full-throated public campaign to revitalize Port Harridan's eastern shore. I pulled the development plans for his project. I looked at the maps, the zoning proposals, and there, marked in red for Phase 1 of demolition, was Spindle Row, the home of Naya Calderon. The entire scheme laid itself bare before me. It was brutal in its simplicity. It wasn't just petty theft. It was a strategic, bottom-up squeeze. You don't just evict a neighborhood. It's messy. It creates martyrs. No, you bleed them dry first. You skim their tips, just enough to make them desperate. Then, you introduce the sharks, predatory lenders, and, for those like Naya's mother, fraudulent medical charities, the Aurelia Relief Trust. You create debt where there was none. You choke them with paperwork, with threats, with calls in the middle of the night, until they are so broken and so poor that when Kincaid's Urban Group offers them 10% of their home's value, they take it. They're grateful for it. You drive the poor off the land, and then you build your glass towers on their bones. My first instinct was to destroy him, to make one call and have Ephraim Kincaid disappear into the harbor he so desperately wanted to redevelop. But that was loud. It would leave a power vacuum, and it wouldn't solve the problem of Verity. She was the rot inside my own walls. I turned back to my leather journal. The ink was still fresh from last night. I uncapped the pen, and beneath the first line, I wrote a second. A confident enemy grows bolder. Let him think I am blind. I would not strike yet. I would let them think their plan was working. I would let them get comfortable. I made 3 calls. The first was to my head of security. Effective immediately. Change all patrol schedules. I want eyes on every corner of this estate, 24/7, and I want a silent inventory of the hidden caches. Every weapon, every round. I want the count on my desk by morning. The second was to my chief financial officer. You are to freeze all pending invoices from Hallow and Company. Do not sever the contract. Do not raise an alarm. Cite a routine systems audit. Delay them. Starve them. But do it quietly. The third call was to no one. It was an action. I went to my personal safe, hidden behind a panel of 19th century maritime maps. I retrieved a device. It was no larger than a button, matte black and inert, a military-grade listening device. Verity's office was in the East Wing. It was all white carpet and gold accents, smelling faintly of her expensive perfume. It was the office of a woman who built an image. I knelt by her antique desk. The one she'd boasted was a gift from a French diplomat. I placed the device under the heavy, carved lip of the desk, completely hidden from view. She had used my name. She had insulted my home by using it as a shield for her greed, and she had targeted my people. I do not move on suspicion. I wait for proof. And now, Verity would deliver it to me herself. I walked into the staff kitchen the next morning feeling like a ghost. I'd barely slept. The sedan's warmth and the weight of Mr. Vitali's coat lingering on my skin long after I'd locked my flimsy apartment door. I was terrified I'd be fired, terrified of what that phone call meant, terrified of the man who had stopped it with a few cold words. I half expected the other staff to shun me, but they just looked at me with a strange, nervous curiosity. I kept my head down, grabbed a simple roll and a cup of coffee, and found a seat at the end of the long steel table, just wanting to be invisible. Then the kitchen doors swung open, and the room went silent. Marco Vitali walked in. It wasn't a kitchen inspection. The head chef, who usually ran the room like a drill sergeant, was just as stunned as the rest of us. Mr. Vitali's presence in the staff area was unheard of. He moved through the room, his eyes scanning everything, and I felt that same stillness from the night before, that sense of a predator calmly observing its territory. His gaze found me. He walked directly to my table. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping loudly on the tile. "Mr. Vitali, sir." He didn't say good morning. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. His eyes dropped to the collar of my uniform, where my apron was pinned. I was clumsy with nerves, and the safety pin was bunched, the fabric puckered. "You're crooked," he said, his voice a low rumble. Before I could react, he lifted his hand. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his suit. He didn't touch my shoulder. He didn't touch my chest. He put 2 fingers, warm and calloused, directly on the small silver pin. My entire body froze. I stopped breathing. His fingers brushed the skin of my collarbone as he expertly unhooked the pin and refastened it, smoothing the fabric flat with a single, precise motion. It took maybe 3 seconds. It felt like an eternity. His touch wasn't gentle or rough. It was deliberate, final. "Better," he said, his hand dropping. It was only as I tried to step back, to regain my balance, that my left knee buckled. A sharp, hot pain shot up my leg, and I hissed, grabbing the table to keep from falling. His eyes snapped down to my knee. "What is it?" "Nothing, sir. It's fine. I slipped on the service stairs last night, after my shift. They were wet from the rain." He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply stepped back and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number from memory. "Lysander," he said, "I need you at the house now. A fall. Yes, in the West Wing. 15 minutes. He hung up and looked at the head chef. "Naya will be off her feet for the rest of the day. See that she's comfortable in the West Parlor." "Sir," the chef stammered. "And send Dr. Lysander there when he arrives." He looked back at me. I was still standing, clutching the table, my face burning. "Go." Dr. Lysander was not a regular doctor. He was an older man with kind eyes and the most efficient hands I'd ever seen. He examined my knee in the opulent silence of the West Parlor, a room I'd only ever vacuumed. "A nasty sprain, Miss Calderon, and a deep bone bruise," he said, his voice soft. "You need to stay off this for at least a week." "A week?" I panicked. I'll lose my job." "You won't," he said, fitting a soft, high-tech brace around my knee. "Mr. Vitali has already arranged for at-home physical therapy. The costs are being handled." He explained that the bill was being routed through something called the Harbor Light Bureau, which he called Mr. Vitali's personal insurance. He left me with the brace, some strong anti-inflammatories, and instructions not to move. I spent the day in a haze, tended to by maids who had been my peers just that morning. It was awkward and terrifying. Late that afternoon, Mr. Vitali returned. He found me in the parlor, my leg propped up on a silk ottoman. He was holding a small, black plastic card. "You'll be on light duty for a while," he said, stopping in the doorway. "No more service stairs." He tossed the card onto the table next to me. It slid across the wood and stopped by my hand. "What is this, sir?" "A night card. It opens the main library. The staff entrance is locked after 10 o'clock. The library is not—" I looked at him, confused. "It's quiet," he said, as if this was a perfectly normal explanation. "There's a fireplace. The kitchen keeps hot bread and mint tea in the warmer until midnight. Don't sit in the cold again." He left before I could find the words to thank him. The next few days were a strange dream. I did light duty, which mostly meant polishing silver in the library, a vast 2-story room filled with the scent of old books and wood smoke. He was right. It was safe. It was warm. I felt seen, and that was more terrifying than being invisible. On Friday, my payday, the old fear returned. I had to send money to my mother. The Aurelia Relief Trust hadn't called again, but the real hospital, the one that was actually treating her, still had its bills. During my lunch break, I limped to the small, grimy check-cashing place down on the wharf, the one that charged a 15% fee but sent the money instantly. I was standing in line, pulling my small wad of cash from my envelope when a shadow fell over me. I turned. Marco Vitali was standing right behind me. I nearly dropped my money. Mr. Vitali, I was just, He wasn't in his suit. He was wearing dark jeans and a heavy wool sweater, looking like a man who worked the docks, not owned them. He looked past me at the greasy, bulletproof glass, then at the sign advertising instant cash transfers, fees apply. His eyes were cold. "This is where you send your money?" he asked. "It's the fastest way. Sir, my mother, they're robbing you," he said. It was a flat statement. He looked at the teller, then back at me. "Give me your mother's account information." "Sir." "Write it down." He handed me a pen from his pocket. Trembling, I scribbled the details on the back of my pay stub. He took the paper, folded it, and put it in his pocket. "Don't use this place again. Go back to the house." He didn't explain. He just turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the line. I went back, confused and scared, but the next morning, I got a text from my mother, Naya Mija. The full amount came through, and it came from some new bank, Vellum Bank. It says all fees were waived. I stared at my phone. Vellum Bank? I'd never heard of it, but I knew, with a certainty that made my heart ache, who was behind it. He had done it silently, without needing a thank you. That night, the safety I'd begun to feel was shattered. I was riding the late bus back to Spindle Row, my knee aching. My neighbor, Mrs. Petrov, a tiny woman with fear etched into her face, got on at the next stop and collapsed into the seat beside me. "They're burning us out. Naya," she whispered, clutching her grocery bag. "What who?" "The city. They put up notices on the old warehouse at the end of our street, mandatory burn for public safety. They say it's a fire hazard. But people store things in there, old furniture, winter clothes." "Ah, that's why they do it," she hissed, her eyes wide. "To scare us, to make us leave. My cousin heard them talking. They want this land. They want us gone." A cold dread, heavier than the rain, settled on me. The warehouse. My mind flashed back 3 nights ago. I'd been woken up by a noise around 2 a.m. I'd looked out my window, which faced the alley behind the warehouse. A truck was back there, a big one. It wasn't a city truck. It had a logo on the side, North Bay Waste. I watched as 2 men rolled heavy chemical barrels off the back, using the service ramp to get into the warehouse. It felt wrong. It was dark, but the streetlight caught the truck's logo. I'd grabbed my phone and recorded it. Maybe 30 seconds of grainy, dark footage, just in case. I thought maybe they were illegally dumping. "Now, Mrs. Petrov's words clicked into place. Chemical barrels, a fire hazard. They weren't just dumping, they were creating the hazard. They were planting the excuse to burn the building. When I got to the mansion, I didn't go to the kitchen. I used the night card. The library was empty, lit only by the glowing embers in the massive fireplace. I found him there, sitting in a large leather armchair, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, staring into the flames. He looked up as I entered. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Sir?" I said, my voice shaking. I was clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles were white. "You're limping," he said. "You should be off your feet. They're gonna burn us out, va..." The words tumbled out. "My neighborhood. Spindle Row. They're gonna set a fire to make us leave." He set his glass down. His eyes became very still. "Who?" "I don't know. The city, a development company, but I think I have proof." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely work the phone. "I saw them a few nights ago. A truck from a company called North Bay Waste. They were putting chemical barrels in the old warehouse, and now the city says the warehouse is a fire hazard. They're going to burn it. I fumbled, trying to find the video file. "I'm scared," I whispered, the admission tearing out of me. "If I show this to anyone, to the police, they'll know it was me. My window is the only one that sees that alley. They'll hurt my mother. They'll hurt me." Marco stood up. He walked over to me, and for the first time, I wasn't just afraid of him. He was the only person who had helped me. He stopped a foot away. "Give it to me." His voice was soft. I looked up at his face, searching his eyes. They weren't cold. They weren't angry. They were sincere. There was no pity in his gaze. There was just focus. "Give it to me, Naya," he said again. "If you want, I won't force you. But if you give it to me, I will handle it. They will not trace it to you, and they will not hurt your mother." It was a promise. He held out his hand. The bond of trust, fragile as it was, formed in that moment. He wasn't just my scary boss anymore. He was the only person standing on my side. I didn't transfer the file. I pulled the tiny memory card from the side of my phone. I placed it in his open palm. His fingers closed around it. "Good, now go and get some tea. Your part in this is over." I nodded, a wave of relief so strong it made my knees weaker than the sprain. I turned to leave the library. As I reached the door, I heard his voice, quiet and cold. Not meant for me. He was on the phone. "Harbor Light," he said. "I have a new target, a company called North Bay Waste. I'm sending you a video file. I want the truck's plates. Even if they're fake, I want the route it took. And I want to know exactly what was in those barrels and where they dumped them." Ephraim Kincaid's face was plastered across the large television in my study. It was a face built for campaign posters. Too many teeth. Eyes that crinkled with synthetic warmth. A perfect helmet of silver hair. He was standing at a podium, a large banner behind him proclaiming, "Port Harridan, a new dawn." He was announcing his plan for the revitalization of the Eastern Shore. And right beside him, her hand resting proprietorially on his arm, was Verity. She was radiant. She wore a cream-colored suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant style. She looked every inch the philanthropist, the civic-minded fiancé of the city's biggest stakeholder. She smiled for the cameras, her eyes bright with a manufactured sincerity that made my stomach tighten. She spoke of green spaces and affordable luxury, and a new wave of development for all. Kincaid called her the moral compass of the project. I called her a liar. I watched them, my face impassive. As they peddled their poison, they were selling a dream of glass towers built on the foundations of Spindle Row, built on the fear of Naya Calderon. While they spoke, I was busy. On my desk was a simple manila envelope, no return address. Inside, I placed a curated selection of documents provided by Harbor Light. There was a map, cross-referencing the truck routes of North Bay Waste with Kincaid Urban Group's declared demolition sites. There was a copy of the chemical analysis of the soil samples Harbor Light had taken from the alley behind the warehouse accelerants. Industrial solvents, all highly toxic. There was a timeline, showing the public safety burn notice was issued just 48 hours after the chemicals were delivered. It wasn't everything. It was just enough to light a fire. I sealed the envelope. I did not mail it. I had a man, one who owed me his life, walk it into the lobby of the Seafront Ledger. He left it on the front desk, addressed to their one true investigative reporter, a woman Kincaid had not yet managed to buy. The Ledger was the only paper in town hungry enough and just independent enough to print it. The story ran 2 days later, on the front page. Toxic renewal Kincaid project linked to chemical dumping in Spindle Row. The city council was forced to pause the burn. Kincaid's stock, traded on the local Port Harridan exchange, dipped 9%. The counterattack came faster than I expected. Kincaid wasn't just greedy, he was clumsy, but he wasn't weak. The call came from my foreman at Wharf 7. "Boss, we've got visitors. The North Line Authority. A full squad. They have a warrant to search the warehouse for contraband." The North Line Authority, Kincaid's personal patrol. "Let them in," I said, my voice calm. "Offer them coffee." I hung up. This was his probe, his pathetic attempt to find leverage, to paint me as just another thug. He was hoping to find drugs, weapons, anything to level the playing field. He was about to be very disappointed. I had spent years building a legitimate enterprise on the bones of the old ways. My warehouses were clean. Not just clean, they were immaculate. An hour later, the foreman called back, his voice thick with amusement. "They're leaving. Boss, looked pretty angry. I don't think they found the 50 tons of black market coffee beans they were hoping for." I hung up, a cold smile touching my lips. The probe had failed, but the message was clear. The game was no longer in the shadows. He had brought it into the light. He had made a mistake. The annual Port Harridan Founders Gala was that Saturday. It was the social event of the season, a grotesque display of wealth held in the city's grand museum. It was precisely the kind of event I despised. It was also the kind of event Verity insisted we attend. This year, I found myself looking forward to it. I walked in with Verity on my arm. She was spectacular in a gown of emerald green, the color of money. Her diamond necklace, a gift from me, sparkled under the lights. She was tense. The Ledger article had rattled her. "You must fix this. Marco," she'd hissed in the car. "That ridiculous little paper is jeopardizing billions in investment. You have influence. Use it. Shut them down." "I'm looking into it," I'd said, my voice noncommittal. We found Kincaid by the champagne fountain. He was holding court, his plastic smile firmly in place, but his eyes were hard. He saw me and broke away from his group. Walking over, Verity's hand tightened on my arm. "Vitaly," Kincaid said, his voice a low, oily greeting. "Bad week for the papers, bad for the city." "The truth is rarely tidy, Councilman," I replied, taking a glass of water from a passing waiter. He leaned in, his smile turning into a sneer. The smell of expensive scotch rolled off him. "Let me give you some advice. You're playing in a league you don't understand. This is about progress. And you," he glanced at Verity, then back at me, "are letting yourself get distracted by the help." My body went perfectly still. "You need to be careful. Vitaly," Kincaid continued, oblivious. "Don't let that little maid doll of yours dirty your marble floors. People might get the wrong idea about who's really running the house." The air around me dropped 10 degrees. I held his gaze. My voice, when I spoke, was barely a whisper. It was light as the wind and just as cold. "My floors are clean. Ephraim, yours are not. I read that inspector's report. It's shocking." He blinked, confused. "What report?" "The one that isn't public yet? The one from Harbor Light? The one with your name right next to the list of toxic waste?" I took a sip of water. "I'd pick a good spot for your name if I were you. You'll want it to look nice when it's printed in black and white." His face went white, then a mottled, furious red. He understood. He finally understood that the Ledger article was my shot across his bow. Before he could speak, Verity stepped forward, her laugh bright and brittle. "Marco, darling, don't tease the councilman. He's working so hard for this city." She turned to me, her eyes flashing a clear, cold warning. "We shouldn't stand in the way of the future. Should we? This wave of development is bigger than any one of us." She was defending him, warning me, choosing her side, right in front of my face. I looked at her, and the last shred of affection I held for the woman I'd once thought I'd marry simply evaporated. It was gone. I smiled at her, a genuine cold smile. "You're right, my love," I said. "It is bigger. And I promised I'd be shocking. Just wait." I placed my empty glass on a tray and left them both standing by the fountain. I drove home alone. I told Verity to enjoy the party. I walked into my study, the silence of the house a welcome relief. I went to the safe behind the maritime maps. I entered the code and it swung open. I didn't look at the cash or the ledgers. I looked at the dark velvet box sitting on the top shelf, the 8-carat diamond I had bought in Antwerp, the ring I'd given Verity when I'd proposed this alliance. I picked it up. It was heavy. I thought of her hand on Kincaid's arm. I thought of her warning. This ring was no longer a symbol of a partnership. It was a leash. It was her leverage, her claim. I tossed the box into the back of the safe. It landed with a dull, unsatisfying thud against the cold steel. I closed the heavy door, spun the dial. I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I uncapped the pen. I thought of Kincaid's threat against Naya, of Verity's betrayal, of the clean warehouse and the dirty land. I wrote my next line. Hit the wallet and the reputation, no blood required. While Kincaid and Verity played their public game of philanthropy, my game was being played in the dark, on servers and in data streams. The Harbor Light Bureau was building its map. It was a beautiful, terrible thing. They laid it out for me on the smart screen in my study, a digital schematic of Port Harridan. It's a symphony. Mr. Vitale, my handler, a man known only as Canto, said. His voice was a dry whisper over the encrypted line. He was right. It wasn't just disparate crimes. It was a coordinated operation. First, he layered the data from Tip Halo. We saw the electronic tips being skimmed, microtransactions all flowing to Hallow and Company. Then, he added the data from the Aurelia Relief Trust, the fraudulent charity that had targeted Naya's mother. The threatening calls they made, always from burner numbers, were mapped. Then came Naya's video. Harbor Light had enhanced the grainy footage, identifying the North Bay waste truck's plates. Even though they were partially obscured by mud, they were fakes, of course, registered to a defunct landscaping company, but the truck itself had a unique dent on its rear fender. Canto's team had pulled satellite and traffic cam footage for the entire city. They found the truck. They tracked its route, from a chemical supply house in the next county, to the alley behind the Spindle Row warehouse, and then to its final destination, a Kincaid Urban Group construction site, where it had dumped the remaining barrels into a foundation pit before it was filled with concrete. But here was the key. Here was the symphony. The public cameras, Canto said, his voice tightening with professional admiration. Look at this. He highlighted 3 intersections on the truck's route. At 2:04 in the morning, the camera at Ridgeline and Wharf went dark. At 2:17, the camera overlooking the Spindle Row alley went dark. At 2:40, the camera at the entrance to the Kincaid construction site went dark. Each blackout lasted exactly 15 minutes, just long enough for the truck to pass unrecorded. An insider, I said, someone at the city traffic control. Or someone with high-level access to the grid, Canto replied. The blackouts weren't malfunctions, they were scheduled. They were turned off. This is a level of coordination that goes beyond Kincaid. This is deep city infrastructure. The map was damning. The skimmed tips, the fraudulent medical calls, the chemical dumping, the camera blackouts, they all aligned. They were all part of the same squeeze. But I still needed the voice that connected the pieces. I needed the link between Kincaid's greed and the rot inside my own house. I got it that night. The tiny bug I had planted in Verity's office was a marvel of technology. It was voice-activated, filtering out ambient noise for days. I had listened to nothing but her shallow, polished calls to florists and caterers. Then, at 11:03 at night, it activated. She wasn't on her phone. Someone was in the room with her. I heard the clink of a glass, then her voice, low and whispering, stripped of its public charm. "You have to be more careful, Jonah," she hissed. "He's looking. The Northline raid was a disaster. It made Kincaid look weak." My hand tightened on the receiver. Jonah Pell, my former head of security, a man I had fired 2 years ago for excessive force and for having a gambling debt he thought I didn't know about. He was competent, ruthless, and, I now realized, stupidly loyal to the highest bidder, Kincaid's shadow. His voice was a low growl I remembered well. "Kincaid's rattled, that Ledger story. He wants to hit back, hard. He wants to shut Vitali up." "Hitting his warehouses is idiotic," Verity snapped. "Marco's clean. You know that. His real power isn't in what's in his crates. It's his name, his reputation." "So what do we do?" Jonah asked. There was a long silence. I heard Verity pace the carpet. "His restaurants," she said, her voice dripping with a venom I'd never heard. "The ones on the wharf. They're his public face. The legitimate Vitali. That's where we hit him. An incident." "Like what, a fire?" "No, too crude," she said. "We're smarter than that. A safety violation, a gas leak, something that makes him look like a negligent hypocrite, bribed employees, a near disaster. We'll film it, we'll leak it, show the city he's just another slumlord, cutting corners, endangering his own people. Kincaid's press contacts will have it on every station by morning." "The kitchens are tight," Jonah said. "His new security won't let me near." "You won't have to," Verity said. "The main kitchen in the house. It supplies the restaurants for private catering, a malfunction there, with the new gas lines. It films just as well. I'll make sure the alarms are accidentally offline for an hour. Wednesday, 2 in the morning, when the night crew is on break." I stopped the recording. She had just given me the time, the place, and the method. She had just handed me the knife she planned to put in my back. I did not call Canto. This was not a data problem. This was a tactical one. I spent the next 48 hours setting my own trap. Verity was right. The main kitchen's gas lines were new. What she didn't know was that they had a secondary, independent shutoff system that I, and only I, controlled. On Tuesday night, I had my own team, men who had been with me for 20 years. Go into that kitchen. They didn't just shut off the gas. They bled the entire line, from the main tank to the stove. Then they connected a new temporary tank. This one was not filled with odorless propane. It was filled with a high-pressure, non-toxic, theatrical smoke, the kind used in stage productions. I chose a deep, unmistakable purple. Next, we dealt with the cameras. Verity planned to disable her own system. She didn't know about mine. I had 3 high-resolution, low-light cameras installed, hidden in the ventilation shafts, capturing the main stove, the gas line junction, and the service entrance, all feeding directly to a secure server in my study. Wednesday, the house was dark. Verity was in her room, establishing her alibi. I was in my study, watching 3 black and white screens. At 2:07 in the morning, the service door on screen 3 opened. 4 men dressed in black slipped in. Jonah Pell was in the lead. He and another man went directly to the gas line junction. The other 2 fanned out, one pulling out a video camera. I watched, my heart beating a low, steady drum. On screen 1, I saw Jonah attach a tool to the valve. He looked at his watch, then nodded to the man with the camera, who raised it to his shoulder. Jonah twisted the tool. He opened the valve. The effect was instantaneous. A massive, thick cloud of violet smoke erupted from the pipe. It was not a leak. It was an explosion of color, billowing out with a loud shh. The men yelled, stumbling back. They hadn't expected the noise or the color. "What the hell is this?" Jonah shouted, waving his hand in front of his face. And then the alarms I had installed went off. Not the fire alarms, a high decibel, pulsing siren coupled with blinding white strobe lights. The intruders were completely disoriented, blinded by the strobes, choking on the harmless smoke. The service door burst open. My security team, 6 men, moved in. They wore night vision goggles and respirators. They moved with silent, brutal efficiency. There were no guns, just hands and a practiced, cold precision. It was over in 30 seconds. Jonah Pell and his 3 men were on the kitchen floor, zip-tied, gasping in the purple haze. The man with the camera was still trying to protect it, even as his arms were bound behind him. Jonah, blinded by the strobes, his lungs full of purple smoke, made his final, fatal error. He was terrified. He wasn't yelling at my men. He was yelling at his own failure. "What went wrong?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "It was supposed to be simple. Kincaid said to keep it light. Just a leak. Kincaid said keep it light." I pressed record on the audio feed. Bang chung vang, golden proof. I let the sirens wail for another minute before I cut them, plunging the room back into silence, broken only by the men's coughing. I did not go down to the kitchen. I did not call the North Line Authority. Kincaid owned them. They would have made the entire thing disappear. Instead, I sat at my desk and compiled a new package. I took the high-definition video from my 3 cameras. I took the crystal-clear audio recording of Jonah Pell's confession. Naming Kincaid, I added the digital map from Harbor Light, showing the coordinated theft, pollution, and fraud. I addressed the entire file not to the police, but to the Crescent Community Safety Committee. The Crescent Committee was a new, strange entity in Port Harridan, an oversight board elected by the neighborhoods, not appointed by the politicians. They had no love for Ephraim Kincaid, who had publicly tried to defund them for the last 2 years. They were powerless, officially. But they had the one thing Kincaid feared: the trust of the people. And they were holding public hearings. I sent the file. Then, I sat in my study and I waited. At 2:53 in the morning, my phone rang. It was an encrypted call. I let it ring twice. It was Verity. I answered. "Hello?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, sharp and panicked. She wasn't in her bed. She was somewhere else. She must have gotten the call from her own lookout, or perhaps Kincaid himself. "Marco," she said. Her voice was a strained whisper. "Verity, is something wrong?" Another pause. I heard a distant siren in the background of her call. "It's all gone wrong," she whispered. It was not a confession. It was a statement of defeat. I said nothing. I just let the silence stretch. Let her sit in the failure she had built. After a full minute, she spoke again, her voice hollow. I need to cancel the wedding planner in the morning." She hung up. I looked at the black screen of my phone. The engagement was broken. The alliance was shattered. The war had begun. The silence in the mansion after that night was heavy, thick with things unsaid. Verity Sloan was gone. Her office was locked. Her name was never mentioned. The staff, who had once walked on eggshells around her, now walked on eggshells around me. I was no longer just Naya, the new maid. I was Naya, the girl who had been driven home by the boss, the girl who had been given a night key, the girl who was rumored to be the reason the boss's glamorous engagement was suddenly, violently, over. I kept to the library, my light duty becoming a permanent assignment. I polished silver that was already gleaming, my hands shaking. I was safe, but I was isolated, trapped in the eye of a storm I didn't understand. I was there, tracing the rim of a silver water pitcher, when he found me. It was late, past 11 at night. The fire was burning low. I hadn't eaten. The rumors had stolen my appetite. "You'll make yourself sick." I jumped, spinning around. Marco was standing by the door, not in his suit, but in a dark sweater, the one he'd worn at the check-cashing place. He was holding a large silver tray. "Sir, I'm sorry, I was just finishing." "You're not finishing, Mo," he said, walking past me. "You're starving." He set the tray down on the massive library table. The aroma that rose from it made my stomach ache with a sudden, sharp hunger. It was a deep bowl of rich chicken soup, thick with noodles and vegetables, and a plate of garlic bread, toasted dark and dripping with butter. I stared at it. "Sir." "The kitchen is trying a new late-night menu," he said, his voice flat, as if this was a plausible lie. "I require a second opinion. Sit." He pulled out a chair for me. I sat, my hands in my lap. He pushed the bowl in front of me and sat opposite, not with his own bowl, but with his customary cup of black coffee. "Eat, Naya." I picked up the spoon. The first bite was hot, salty, and felt like life itself. I ate, and he watched, sipping his coffee. The silence was different this time. It wasn't the tense, analytical silence of our first meal. It was patient. "You're a good cook," I said quietly. gesturing to the soup. A flicker of something amusement passed through his eyes. My grandmother's recipe. She believed garlic and chicken could cure anything. Fear, sadness, bad investments. I smiled, a real small smile. The warmth of the soup was spreading through me, unknotting the fear in my stomach. My mother is the same, I said, surprising myself. But with cinnamon and sweet pastry, she always said you can't be sad when you're eating a cinnamon roll. He leaned forward, his coffee cup cradled in his hands. Your mother. She's doing well. Better, I said, the word catching in my throat. The new bank, I said, meeting his eyes. It's made all the difference. The Aurelia Relief Trust is gone. The real doctors can finally do their work. Good. She used to run a small bakery before she got sick, back home. I hadn't meant to say it, but the quiet of the library, the warmth of the soup, it just came out. It wasn't much, just a little stall, but people would line up in the morning. For her cinnamon rolls, he asked. His voice was quiet, genuinely curious. And her polvorones, and the pastelitos de guayaba. We had this dream, that when we saved enough, we'd open a pastry cart, a proper one, with wheels, down at the wharf market. We'd call it, well, it sounds silly. What would you call it? The Calderone cart, I whispered. I have all the recipes. I know the suppliers. I know the cost per unit. I know what the fishermen buy at 5 in the morning and what the tourists buy at 11. I stopped, horrified. I was rambling. I was telling this dangerous, powerful man about my silly, impossible dream. I looked down, my face burning. I'm sorry, sir, Don't apologize. He stood up and walked to the massive desk in the corner. He unlocked a drawer and took out the leather-bound journal. My heart stopped. He was going to write in it, about me. But he didn't. He flipped past the pages with his sharp, black script. He stopped at a clean, blank page. He uncapped his pen. At the top of the page, he wrote Calderone pastry cart plan. He turned the journal around and slid it across the table to me, along with his heavy, expensive pen. I stared at the words. Put your dreams here, he said, his voice low. Write it all down, the recipes, the costs, the suppliers you mentioned, everything. I will provide the capital, you will provide the recipes. I looked up at him, my eyes blurring. I couldn't speak. This isn't charity, Naya, he said, his voice firm, as if sensing my thoughts. It's an investment. I only make good investments. I expect a return. I reached out a trembling hand. I didn't touch the pen. I touched the leather cover of the journal. It was warm from his hands. He wasn't pitying me. He wasn't saving me. He was seeing me. He was listening to my dream and calling it a business plan. The best recipe, I stammered, my voice thick, is the cinnamon cookie. It's just dough. It's fast. Show me, he said. We went to the main kitchen. It was past midnight, vast and silent, gleaming purple in my memory. But tonight, it was just a kitchen. I moved with a new confidence, my limp almost forgotten. I pulled bowls, butter, sugar, flour, and a jar of Vietnamese cinnamon. I worked quickly, my hands remembering the motions my mother had taught me. He didn't watch me like a hawk. He leaned against the counter, observing, silent. I mixed the dough, rich and brown and fragrant. It's best after it chills, I said. But you can taste the dough. I held out the spoon, with a small scoop of raw cookie dough on the end. He looked at the spoon, then at my face. For a moment, I thought he would refuse, that this was too familiar, too human. Slowly, he leaned forward and took the dough from the spoon with his lips. He closed his eyes. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just savored it. When his eyes opened, the dark, controlled mask was gone. Just for a second, his eyes were bright, genuinely, startlingly bright. A slow, small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first real smile I had ever seen from him. Good, he said, his voice a little rough. A very good investment. That moment of brightness changed things. The rumors in the house grew worse. The staff saw the late-night kitchen visit, the new energy in my step. They saw the boss's smile, and they interpreted it in the only way they knew how. They called me his new toy, his pet. The whispers followed me, and the fear came back. He found me in the gym. I'd been sent to dust the equipment, a task I was failing as I tried to ignore two maids whispering by the door. Marco entered, and they scattered like birds. He'd changed out of his suit and was in black workout pants and a gray t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders. "They're afraid of you," I said quietly, wiping down a treadmill. "No," he said, stopping in the middle of the floor mats. "They're afraid of you, of what you represent. Change." He looked at my hands, which were clenched around the dust rag. "You're afraid, too, but for the wrong reasons. I don't know how to fight this," I whispered. "The way they look at me." "You don't fight whispers," he said. "You ignore them. You fight what's real. Come here." He stood in the center of the mat. "They see you as a victim, as weak. Are you?" "No," I said, my voice firmer. "Show me." He beckoned me onto the mat. "I'm going to teach you how to make space." "Sir." Basic self-defense. You live in Spindle Row, you're now a target, you need to know how to get away, not to win, to escape. Now, stand in front of me. I did. He was tall, solid as a wall of brick. "Rule 1, he said, his voice becoming the sharp, precise tool of a teacher. "Distance. This is your space. Never let an enemy inside it." He had me hold my arms out. "That's your frame. Now, brace your core." He taught me for an hour. It was not a dance. It was not romantic. It was clinical. It was about physics. He showed me how to break a wrist grip, using my thumb against the attacker's joint. He showed me how to use my entire body weight to strike, not with a fist, but with the heel of my palm. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip firm but not violent. "They grab you. What do you do?" I don't know." "You don't pull back. They're stronger. You go in." He showed me how to drop my weight, twist my hips, and drive my elbow into the ribs. His touch was completely impersonal. His hands were on my arms, my shoulders, my back, but only to correct my form. There was not 1 ounce of inappropriate contact. It was respectful. It was empowering. Again, he'd command, and I'd do it. By the end, I was sweating, but I was standing taller. As I toweled off, the fear I'd had earlier returned. "Mr. Vitale," I said, my voice low. "The whispers, they won't stop. They're saying that I'm with you, that I'm the reason, miss. Sloan is gone." He stopped, his back to me. He slowly turned. His face was unreadable. "People like to dirty what they can't understand," he said, his voice quiet. "They see kindness, and they call it a transaction. They see strength, and they call it a threat. Their words are meaningless. You only need to believe the truth." "What is the truth?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He held my gaze. "The truth is, you are not a victim. You are an investor, and you are under my protection. That is all." He left me standing there, my heart hammering a new, complicated rhythm. That night, as I left the mansion, a cold, fine mist was falling, the kind of rain that soaks you through in seconds. I paused at the edge of the main terrace, bracing myself for the cold dash across the open-air courtyard to the staff gate. Before I could take the first step, I heard a low, electric whir. I looked up. The long, retractable awning, a dark canvas sheet I'd only ever seen tucked away, was gliding smoothly out from the wall. It moved on silent runners, extending all the way across the walkway, creating a perfect dry tunnel to the gate. It stopped. The rain pattered gently against the canvas above me. I looked up at the dark, floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, 2 floors above. I couldn't see him. There was no light, no shadow. But I knew he was there. He had seen me. He had sheltered me. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't needed to. I clutched my bag and walked, dry and safe, under the shelter he had provided, The bomb I had sent to the Crescent Community Safety Committee detonated exactly as I'd planned. The public hearing was a slaughter. My video of the purple smoke, Jonah Pell's screaming confession naming Kincaid, and the Harbor Light data map showing the chemical dumping were played on a massive screen for all of Port Harridan to see. The Seafront Ledger live-streamed every second of it. Faced with undeniable proof of corruption, fraud, and endangerment, the Crescent Committee voted unanimously to demand the city suspend all of Kincaid Urban Group's permits. The market reacted. Kincaid's company wasn't just a private venture, it was publicly traded on the local exchange. By noon the next day, his stock had collapsed, shedding 28% of its value, billions in projected worth, erased. I had hit his wallet, I had hit his reputation. Ephraim Kincaid was no longer just a greedy politician. He was a cornered, wounded animal, and I knew he would lash out. I had insisted Naya use my driver, but she had been growing more confident since our session in the gym. She'd started taking the bus, wanting, she'd said, to feel normal again. That evening, she'd waved the driver off, saying she wanted to walk the last few blocks from the main stop. It was a mistake. She was crossing Ridgeline Bridge, the old iron lattice span over the black, oily water of the lower canal. It was a poorly lit, narrow walkway, a shortcut to the top of Spindle Row. She heard the footsteps behind her, heavy and fast, 2 men. "Just want to talk, little girl," one of them grunted, his voice rough. "Councilman Kincaid is very interested in what you have to say." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Rule 1 distance. She clutched her bag and walked faster. They ran. They grabbed her. One man seized her by the left arm, his fingers biting in. The other lunged for her shoulder. The Naya of a few weeks ago would have frozen, screamed, or pleaded. This Naya did not. You don't pull back. You go in. She dropped her weight, pivoted hard into the man holding her arm, and slammed the heel of her free hand directly onto his wrist joint, just as I had taught her. He howled in pained surprise, his grip breaking. The second man lunged. "Make space!" She didn't try to run past him. She dodged his grab and sprinted, not to the end of the bridge, but to the side. With a desperate, sobbing breath, she hauled herself up and over the low auxiliary railing. She hung there for 1 split second, the dark, churning water of the canal a 20-foot drop below. The hell, she jumped. She let go. I was in my study, watching the Cug stock bleed out on my monitor, when the silent alarm in my desk drawer activated. It wasn't an alarm, it was a dedicated receiver. The screen glowed red, showing a single GPS coordinate: Ridgeline Bridge, canal level. The night card, the key I had given her to the library. It wasn't just a key. I'd had Harbor Light embed a pressure-activated SOS chip in the laminate. She must have squeezed it with all her strength in the moments before they grabbed her. She was in the water. I didn't call security. I didn't call the North Line Authority. Kincaid owned them. This was not a police matter. This was mine. I was out of the chair and in the garage in under 30 seconds. The black coupe's engine tore through the silence of the night. I wasn't driving to Spindle Row. I was driving to my private dock. Naya hit the freezing water with a shock that stole her breath. The cold was a physical blow, but she was a strong swimmer, and she saw it tied to the mossy bridge abutment, a small, derelict fishing skiff, half filled with rainwater. She swam 3 desperate strokes and dragged herself over the side, collapsing onto the wet floorboards. She crawled under a ripped canvas tarp at the bow, her entire body shaking uncontrollably, her knee throbbing, but she was alive. She heard them on the bridge above. Find her. She couldn't have gone far. Get that boat started. I made the drive to the dock in just under 4 minutes. As I cut the engine, I heard the sputter of a cheap outboard motor. They'd found a small motorboat tied up nearby, their flashlight beam, weak and yellow, cut uselessly across the black water as they chugged away from the bridge. "She's in the water somewhere. Kincaid will have our hides if we lose her." They didn't see me. My boat wasn't a skiff. It was a 30-foot interceptor, painted matte black, Its twin engines designed for silence and speed. I fired the ignition. The engines didn't roar. They thrummed, a low, liquid metal sound. I hit the switch to kill my running lights. I was a shadow moving on the water. I let them get a 50-yard lead, heading toward the open harbor. Then I opened the throttle. The interceptor didn't accelerate. It launched. It rose on the water, a black blade cutting through the chop. They heard me coming and turned, their eyes wide as I hit my forward spotlight. A million candle-power beam of white light flooded them, turning their panicked faces into ghostly masks. Who the hell is that? Their boat was old. Mine was a weapon. Rain began to fall again, hard and cold, and I sped through the silver-streaked darkness. The man at the tiller fumbled, trying to turn. The second man, the one who had grabbed Naya's arm, actually pulled a gun. I rammed them. I didn't aim for the center. I aimed for the stern, just left of the motor. The impact of my reinforced fiberglass hull against their rotting wood was precise. The man with the gun was thrown from his feet. He staggered, firing a wild shot into the night sky, and toppled backward into the churning, black water. The second man screamed as their engine sputtered, choked on the wake, and died. I spun the interceptor in a tight circle, idling the engines. The man in the water was flailing, screaming, "Help, help me! I can't swim!" The other man clung to the side of their sinking boat. I could have kept going. I could have let the cold and the canal water do their work. It would have been clean. It's what Kincaid would have done. I pulled a lifebuoy from its hook. I glided the boat closer until the man in the water was thrashing just feet away. I threw the buoy. It landed with a splash beside him. "Grab it," I commanded. He lunged for it, his panicked eyes meeting mine. I looked at the other man, the one clinging to the wreckage. "Tell Kincaid, tell him this is the difference between us." I left them there. The current would take them to the bank. They would live, and they would deliver my message. I cut the spotlight and gunned the engine back toward the bridge. "Naya!" My voice echoed under the iron. A small, shaking voice came from the darkness. "Here, I'm here." I saw the skiff. I brought my boat alongside it, my hand steady on the wheel. She was huddled under the tarp, soaked and shivering, but her eyes were wide and alive. I reached out my hand. "Come." She half fell, half climbed into my boat, and I pulled her into the small, dry cabin. I grabbed a thick wool emergency blanket from a locker and wrapped it tightly around her. She was shaking so violently her teeth chattered, but she wasn't crying. She was in shock, her hands like ice. She reached out, her fingers clumsy, and took a fistful of my jacket sleeve. She just held on, her knuckles white, as if I were the only anchor in the world. I sat with her for a moment, my hand on her shoulder, feeling the tremors run through her. I said nothing. I just let her hold on to me as I piloted us back to the dock, the low thrum of the engines the only sound. I put her in the coupe, the heater blasting. The shaking had begun to subside, but she still hadn't let go of my sleeve. "You used the training," I said. "It wasn't a question." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the windshield wipers. "I hit his wrist. I made space." "You did well." She finally let go of my jacket. She turned in the seat, the blanket pooled around her, and looked at me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fire I had never seen before. "He tried to kill me," she whispered. "Yes, because of what I saw, because of Spindle Row, because he's afraid." "Yes." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm not running anymore. I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid of men like him." She met my gaze, her own unwavering. "I will testify. The Crescent Committee, the real police, anyone, I will stand in front of all of them and I will tell them everything. I'll tell them about the truck, the chemicals, the threats, everything." I looked at her. The girl who had cried in the rain over cold pasta was gone. This was a woman forged in my gym and in the cold water of the canal. "Good," I said. "Because they will try to destroy you. They will try to discredit you or silence you for good. If you are going to speak, we do it my way. Help. We prepare you to speak safely, and we prepare the world to listen. I picked up my secure phone. The first call was to Harbor Light. "Kanto," I said. "We're escalating. I need a full, impenetrable safety net around Naya's mother. I want her moved tonight. Use the Greenwick Lodge protocol. I want her completely off the grid, comfortable and safe, until I say otherwise." I hung up and looked at Naya. Her face was set. "Now," I said, putting the car in gear, "we teach you how to tell your story." The decisive blow wouldn't be in the dark. It would be public, broadcast for the entire city to see. We wouldn't just give them the truth, we would make it impossible for them to ignore. The night before the public hearing was a night outside of time. The rest of the mansion was asleep, holding its breath for the storm to come. But in the library, the only sound was the soft thud of a log shifting in the massive fireplace. The air was warm, smelling of old paper and wood smoke. I had been practicing my statement. Reading the words Harbor Light had helped me prepare until the letters blurred. He was there, across the room, reviewing a different set of documents. We'd been working in this charged silence for hours. I finally stood up. I was holding the trench coat he had given me that first night. It had been professionally cleaned and pressed, folded perfectly over my arm. It felt 100 times heavier than it had when it was soaked with rain. I walked over to his desk. He looked up, his eyes dark in the firelight, the hard lines of his face softened by fatigue. "I came to return this," I said, my voice too quiet for the big room. I held out the coat. "Thank you for that night." He looked at the coat, then at my face. He didn't move to take it. "Keep it," he said. "Sir, I can't. It's a coat. Naya, you'll need one for the storm." I looked down at the dark, heavy wool. I clutched it tighter. "It's more than a coat," I whispered. "The admission costing me. It smells like peace, like the first time I felt safe in this city." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes deepened. He stood up slowly, not like a man getting out of a chair, but like a force, rising. He moved from behind the desk, stepping into the warm, open space in front of the fire. He stopped, just a foot away from me. I was still clutching his coat to my chest, like a shield. He was so close, I could feel the heat from his body, distinct from the fire. He didn't move. He just watched me. He watched my eyes, my mouth, the way my breath hitched. The air between us became a solid, living thing. It was electric. He lifted his hand, but he didn't touch me. He let it hang in the air. A question. His gaze dropped to my lips, then instantly met my eyes again. He was asking, without a single word, he was asking, "May I?" My heart was a drum against my ribs. This was not my boss. This was not the scary phantom of Port Harridan. This was just Marco, the man who had listened to my dreams, who had taught me to fight, who had built a wall of safety around my mother. I gave him my answer. I didn't speak. I just nodded. A single, slow, deliberate nod. My eyes never left his. It was a clear, unmistakable yes. He leaned in, his movement achingly slow. He was giving me every chance to pull away. The first kiss was just a touch. It was a test, a whisper. His lips were firm, warm, and they brushed mine with a tentative, impossible gentleness. It was over in a second, but it left a brand. I tasted the faint, bitter trace of his coffee, and he must have tasted the cinnamon from the cookie I'd stolen from the kitchen an hour ago. His warm breath mixed with mine. "Naya," he breathed, his voice a low vibration that I felt more than heard. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tense, finally relaxed. The coat I was holding slipped, and his hand moved to catch it. He didn't let it fall. He tossed it onto the nearby armchair, and his hand, now free, came up to my back. His palm was so warm. He didn't place it on my waist or my lower back. He placed it high, between my shoulder blades, a gesture of pure support. It was a touch that said, "I am here. I am holding you up." That single respectful touch undid me. I let out the breath I'd been holding. He took that as his invitation. This time, The kiss was real. It was still slow, still achingly tender, but it was deep. It was a conversation. It wasn't hungry, it was searching. He was learning the shape of my mouth, and I was learning his. We weren't two bodies colliding. We were two exhausted, embattled souls finally finding a moment of quiet. Our heartbeats sped up, beating in the same frantic rhythm. He pulled back, just an inch, his eyes dark and shining in the firelight. He looked at me, a question in his gaze. I must have smiled, because a small, rare smile touched his own lips. He leaned in, and our foreheads touched. We just stood there, breathing each other in. Safe. My hands, which had been frozen at my sides, lifted. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to be closer. I slowly, shyly, looped my arms around his neck. I didn't pull him down. I just held on. I pressed myself closer, just enough to feel the solid, steady strength of his chest against mine. It felt like the first safe harbor I had ever known. He responded instantly. His other arm came around me, and he enveloped me in an embrace that was absolute. It was not the possessive grip of an owner. It was the grounding, unshakable hold of a protector. It was solid. It was real. I buried my face in the curve of his neck, breathing in the scent of him clean soap, wool, and that faint, unique smell of ozone and power that was just Marco. One of his hands moved, his fingers, calloused and strong, began to trace the line of my spine, right through the thin fabric of my blouse. It wasn't a sensual caress. It was a mapping, a reassurance. But the simple, gliding pressure of his fingertips on my back sent a shiver through my entire body. It was a thrill that was equal parts safety and a terrifying, fluttering cow-cat, a longing to be this close, always. We stood like that in the firelight for a long, silent time, just holding each other. "Tomorrow will be a storm," he whispered, his voice rough against my hair. I didn't pull back. I just held him tighter. "I'm not afraid," I whispered, "not when I'm with you." I felt his chest expand with a deep breath. He paused. "No," he said, his voice so low I almost missed it. "When I am with you, I am not afraid." It was the most honest, vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say. It was a confession. We pulled apart slowly, reluctantly. We were both breathing a little too fast. A soft laugh, nervous and warm, escaped me. He smiled again, a true, unguarded smile that lit his entire face. He looked tired, but the darkness in his eyes was gone. There was only warmth. He didn't try to kiss me again. He didn't lead me to a couch. He simply kept one hand on my arm, as if to anchor me. He guided me to the large, soft armchair nearest the hearth, the one that still held his trench coat. He picked up a thin, cashmere throw blanket from the back of the sofa, and he draped it gently over my shoulders, tucking it around me. "You need to rest," he said. He pulled over the small footstool, but he didn't sit on it. He sat on the floor, on the thick Persian rug, his back against the side of my chair. He was close enough that I could have reached out and touched his hair. He just sat, watching the fire. Then he reached up and took my hand. He didn't stroke it. He didn't play with my fingers. He just held it. His large, warm hand enveloped mine, his thumb resting gently on my pulse point. We sat there in the warm, peaceful silence. We watched the logs burn down, the bright orange flames turning to soft, glowing red embers. And for one night, before the war began, we were not a boss and a maid. We were just Naya and Marco, and we were safe. The hearing room in the Port Harridan Civil Hall was a theater of bright, hot lights and clicking cameras. It felt nothing like the library. It felt like an operating table. The entire room was packed. People from Spindle Row, their faces anxious and worn, were crammed in the back rows. Reporters lined the aisles, at the front. The Crescent Committee sat at a raised dais, looking grim. I sat in the front row, Marco on one side of me and a quiet, severe-looking lawyer from Harbor Light on the other. Then The main doors opened, and Ephraim Kincaid swept in. He was not alone. He was flanked by a team of 4 expensive lawyers. And walking just beside him, her head held high, was Verity Sloane. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't dressed like a woman in disgrace. She was wearing a sharp, cobalt blue suit, her blonde hair pulled back. She looked like a CEO, a shark. She met my gaze across the room, and her eyes were not apologetic, or even angry. They were dead. She was here as his partner. "The committee calls its first witness," the chairman said, his voice booming over the microphone. "Miss Naya Calderon." My legs felt like water. Marco didn't look at me, but I felt his hand, out of sight, press firmly against my lower back, a gesture of pure support. I am here. I walked to the stand. I swore the oath. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely keep it on the railing. "Miss Calderon," the chairman began, "please tell the committee, in your own words, what you observed on the night of October 3rd. I opened my mouth, and for a second, no sound came out. My throat was dry. I looked at Kincaid, who was watching me with a smug, reptilian confidence. I looked at Verity, who was examining her fingernails. Then I looked at Marco. He was watching me, his gaze steady, unwavering. It was the same look he'd given me in the gym. Brace your core. I took a breath. My voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper. I live in Spindle Row. My window overlooks the alley behind the old Grey Wharf warehouse. I took another breath, and this time, the voice was mine. It was clear, it was firm. At 2:17 in the morning, I saw a truck from a company called North Bay Waste. I watched them unload chemical barrels into the warehouse. It felt wrong, so I recorded it. "Do you have that recording?" "I do." The lights in the room dimmed. On the large screens behind the committee, my grainy cell phone video played, the truck, the logo, the barrels. A collective gasp rose from the back of the room. "And what happened next, Miss Calderon?" "The next day," I said, my voice gaining strength, "the city posted notices. They said that same warehouse was a fire hazard and had to be burned for public safety. They were planting the excuse. They were going to burn us out." I presented the timeline. The map Harbor Light had helped me build, showing the link between Kincaid's development plan and the threats against my mother. I spoke for 20 minutes. When I was done, the room was completely, deathly silent. Kincaid's lawyer tried his best, but he couldn't touch me. I just told the truth. Then Verity Sloane stood up. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice like smooth, cold glass, "as a community stakeholder and a victim of what is clearly a malicious personal attack, I request the right to ask the witness a question." The chairman looked surprised, but he nodded. "Granted." Verity turned her full, polished attention on me. The cameras swung to capture her. "Miss Calderon," she began, "you were a maid at the Vitale estate, a position you held for less than a month. Is that correct?" "Yes. And in that time, you went from scrubbing floors to having private dinners with Mr. Vitale in his library. You were given a private car, his personal key, his protection." My face burned. "He was helping me." "Oh, I'm sure he was," Verity said, her voice dripping with insinuation. She turned to the committee. "This isn't a whistleblower. This is a classic, pathetic gold digger. A young woman who saw an opportunity to seduce a wealthy, powerful man, and who fabricated this entire fantasy, the video, the threats to secure her place in his house. She is lying. She is the reason my engagement was broken. This is a personal vendetta, not public testimony." The room erupted in shouts. People were yelling, "Shame!" The chairman banged his gavel. "That is enough, Miss Sloane." But before he could finish, Marco stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The room went silent instantly, just at the sight of him rising to his full height. He looked at Verity, and the temperature in the room dropped. "Mr. Chairman," Marco's voice was low, and it carried to every corner, "you are not listening to a gold digger. You are listening to the woman who saved an entire neighborhood with a memory card." He turned his gaze to Verity. You, on the other hand, used your office to steal from that same neighborhood. Verity's smile faltered. That is a baseless, slanderous accusation. Is it? Marco said. Mr. Chairman, I call Mr. Aris Thorne, head of digital compliance for Tip Halo. A small, nervous man in a rumpled suit was sworn in. Kincaid was whispering furiously to his lawyer. Verity looked, for the first time, like she was trapped. Mr. Thorne, Marco said, in your audit, did you find the source of the unauthorized skimming of employee tips? We did, Thorne said, reading from a file. The funds were routed to an anonymous digital wallet. We traced the creation of that wallet and who created it. The account username was vsloan_admin. It was created on April 9th of this year. The IP address used to create it is registered directly to the East Wing office of the Vitale estate, Miss Sloane's office. Verity went white as paper. This is a lie, Kincaid roared, leaping to his feet. This is a fabrication. You have no proof. You can't tie me to any of this. Not the tips, not the truck, nothing. Marco looked at Kincaid, his face a mask of cold patience. You are correct. Councilman, that only proves Miss Sloane's theft. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. As for your involvement in the fire, Marco slid his personal phone from his pocket. He touched the screen. I need you to handle Spindle Row. It's dirty. Kincaid's voice, oily and confident, filled the hearing room. It was the audio from the gala. A cleanup, the recording of Kincaid continued. I don't care how. A fire starts, it burns, it's a tragedy, and we rebuild. Just get it done. The room exploded. It was pandemonium. The chairman was banging his gavel. Reporters were shouting, and the people from Spindle Row were on their feet, screaming, Murderer! Verity grabbed her bag, her face a mask of terror, and tried to push her way toward the exit. Seize them, the chairman yelled. The committee's own security detail, 2 men in suits, moved toward Kincaid. At the same time, 2 of my Harbor Light agents, now wearing official committee credentials, moved to block Verity's exit. One of them, Canto's chief deputy, held up a small, black hard drive. Whoa. Mr. Chairman, he shouted over the noise, this is the master drive with all the verified data. We are handing it to committee security. He held it out to the guard. Hit! A sound like a massive snake. A canister rolled from a side door, and the front of the room was instantly engulfed in thick, white smoke. People screamed. It was chaos. My eyes burned. Through the smoke, I saw a figure. Black tactical gear, a gas mask. He moved with a brutal speed. It was Jonah Pell. He wasn't going for Kincaid. He wasn't going for Verity. He slammed his shoulder into the Harbor Light agent, tackling him to the ground. He ripped the black hard drive from the man's hand. He has the drive, I screamed. Pell threw a second smoke canister toward the main doors, blocking the path. He turned and ran, disappearing back through the side door he'd used, the one that led to the service tunnels. The smoke alarms were blaring now. The room was choking. Marco grabbed my arm, his grip like steel. He pulled me low under the worst of the smoke, dragging me toward the same side door. He's running. Marco's voice was a low growl in my ear. We burst into the concrete hallway just as the main doors opened and officers from the North Line Authority began to pour in. Thank God, I gasped. Give them... No, Marco's voice was ice. They're not here to catch him. They're here to help him escape. They're Kincaid's. He pulled me down the hall. He's going to Grey Wharf, Warehouse 14. It's his primary bolt hole, packed with cash and weapons. He's going to burn the drive and disappear. We rounded a corner, and 2 of Marco's own men, the ones who had been sitting in the back, met us. They were already moving, shrugging on dark jackets. Marco looked at me. You stay here. Lock the door. You're safe. No, I said, grabbing the front of his jacket. The girl from the library was gone. The woman from the canal was here. You'll never catch him in those tunnels. I grew up playing in them. I know the shortcuts. I know where that warehouse is. You need me. He stared at me. his eyes searching mine in the dim emergency light. He saw the truth. He saw I wasn't afraid. He didn't have time to argue. He nodded once. "Stay behind me, no matter what." He spoke to his men. "He gets out with that drive. We lose. We don't let him." We ran into the darkness of the service tunnels, the sound of the useless city sirens fading behind us. It was far too late to turn back now. We burst from the service tunnels into the night, and the storm met us like a solid wall. The rain wasn't falling. It was attacking, driven by a wind that screamed off the harbor, Grey Wharf. Warehouse 14 was a vast, dark shape ahead of us, a black box against the bruised, lightning-lit sky. The main bay door was half open. The only light was a single, tiny red bulb over a side door, flashing, pulse, pulse, pulse. "He's wired it," one of Marco's men said, his voice tight. "That's a detonator light." Jonah Pell wasn't just running. He was planning to burn the evidence, the warehouse, and anyone who followed him. We heard a shout from inside, a muffled, angry voice, then another. We didn't go to the trap side door. Marco led us to a grimy, streaked window, slick with rain. We peered through the dark. The inside of the warehouse was cavernous, a tomb of stacked crates and steel shadows. In a small pool of light in the center, Jonah Pell was standing. He was holding the black hard drive, but he wasn't alone. Facing him were two men I didn't know, and Ephraim Kincaid. Kincaid was soaked, his silver hair ruined, his plastic smile gone, replaced by a wet snarl. He had a gun, and it was pointed directly at Jonah. "You failed, Jonah," Kincaid's voice echoed in the vast space. "You failed at the house, and you failed at the hearing. Give me the drive." "I got it, didn't I?" Jonah's voice was panicked. "I got it clear. I did what you said." "You were a loose end the moment you opened your mouth on Vitali's recording," Kincaid sneered. "Now, give me the drive, and I'll make this quick." A standoff. Kincaid, ready to execute his own man. Jonah, trapped between his former boss and us. Before a shot could be fired, Marco moved. He didn't signal his men. He just walked out of the shadows, emerging into the light from the open bay door, his hands empty and open at his sides. "Good evening, Councilman," Marco said. His voice a calm, conversational rumble that cut through the sound of the rain hammering on the tin roof. It's poor form to kill your employees. Kincaid and Jonah both spun, stunned. Vitali Kincaid's gun snapped toward Marco. "You're dead. You're both dead." "Are we?" Marco said, taking another casual step forward. "You're all fighting over a piece of plastic. It doesn't matter. You lost the moment you put my fiancé on your payroll. Ephraim—" "The drive has the proof!" Kincaid shrieked. "The drive is a copy," Marco said, a cold, devastating bluff. "The primary data was live-streamed from a secure server. The Ledger, the Crescent Committee, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they all have it. It's been public for 10 minutes. It's over." Kincaid's face contorted. He was searching Marco's eyes, trying to see the lie. "He's bluffing," Jonah Pell yelled, his eyes wide. "Is he—" I stepped out. My voice was shaking, but it was loud. I held up my phone. Marco's head snapped to me. His eyes widened. This was not part of his plan. While they had been staring at each other, I had been staring at the crates Jonah was standing next to. They were stenciled with a logo, a stylized W, Wisp Vault Cloud Storage, and beneath it, a QR code. "The company's backup." I had scanned it. "He's not bluffing," I said, holding my phone high, its screen glowing in the darkness. "But he's wrong about one thing. The data wasn't just live-streamed. The master file is right here. The original contracts, the offshore accounts, the real chemical orders, all linked to Wisp Vault." Kincaid saw the glowing screen. He saw the Wisp Vault logo. He saw his entire empire, his entire life, on my phone. He broke. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a raw, primal scream of rage. "You!" he shrieked, and he raised his gun. He didn't aim at Marco. He aimed at me. Time stopped. I didn't even have time to flinch. I just saw the black hole of the barrel. Marco moved. He was a shadow, A blur, faster than I could have believed. He didn't try to stop Kincaid. He lunged at me. He slammed into me, his body a solid wall, shielding me completely. He wrapped his arms around me, his coat enveloping me, and shoved us both back, crashing hard against the tower of crates. His head was down, his body curled protectively over mine. He was waiting for the bullet. I was crushed against his chest, my face buried in his jacket, smelling the rain and the cold night air. His heart was hammering against mine. A distant train whistle wailed, and a crack of lightning illuminated the warehouse, freezing us in a tableau of violence. The shot never came. You were going to kill me, Jonah Pell's voice was a ragged scream. He had seen it. He had seen Kincaid abandon him, seen him try to murder me. He understood, in that final second, that he was just trash to be taken out. He raised his own gun. He fired. The shot was wild, a shot of pure panic. It didn't hit Kincaid. It didn't hit us. It went high, ricocheting off a steel rafter with a metallic ping. It struck a 4-inch water main that ran along the ceiling. It wasn't a leak. The pipe exploded. A high-pressure deluge of icy water crashed down from the ceiling, slamming into the center of the room. The force was stunning. It hit Jonah Pell like a physical blow, throwing him off his feet and sending him skidding across the concrete floor. The black hard drive flew from his hand and spun into a dark, oily puddle. "Now," Marco roared. The warehouse was suddenly full of motion. The 2 Harbor Light men, who had flanked us in the shadows, moved in. They were not alone. A full team of Marco's security, who had been waiting for a signal, swarmed in from the bay door. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. Kincaid stood frozen, soaked and defeated. His men threw down their guns. Jonah Pell was pinned to the floor in seconds, the water still raining down. It was done. As Marco's men secured the room, his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, shielding it from the water. It was a live news alert, Verity. She was in a pristine television studio, already spinning. Her face was a mask of calm, concerned sincerity. "It is a tragedy," she was saying, "that a disgruntled former employee and a confused young woman could be manipulated by Meister Vitali into this slanderous smear campaign." Marco watched her, his face like stone. He tapped his phone, pulling up a file, an email. He hit forward. He sent it to the one reporter at the Seafront Ledger he knew wasn't for sale. On the screen, the reporter covering Verity's press conference suddenly held up his earpiece. "Mrs. Sloan," he interrupted, "I'm sorry. We are just receiving a copy of an email sent from your account to Mr. Kincaid, dated April 9th. It reads, 'The cut from the Tip Halo app must be small enough that no one complains. I suggest 3%. They'll never even feel it. Can you comment on your partnership with Mr. Kincaid?'" Verity's face froze. The composure, the training, the lifetime of lies, it all shattered. The broadcast signal went black. The Crescent Committee, armed with the hard drive, the cloud data, and Verity's final email, formally transferred the entire case to the Port Harridan Superior Court. The North Line Authority, implicated and exposed, had no choice but to cooperate. The public pressure was too great. The storm outside had broken. The hammering rain on the roof softened, then stopped. The only sound in the warehouse was the drip of water and the quiet, professional voices of Marco's team. He turned to me. His hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his chin. He reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from my face. "It's over, Naya," he said, his voice low. The adrenaline, the cold, the terror, it all drained out of me at once. My legs buckled. I didn't fall. He caught me. I buried my face in his chest, and I cried. I cried for my mother, for the cold nights, for the fear I had lived with for so long. He just held me. His arms were locked around me, a solid, unshakable anchor in the wreckage. It wasn't a frantic, passionate embrace. It was slow. It was certain. It was an arrival. The epilogue wrote itself. Spindle Row received an emergency fund for repairs, paid for by the assets seized from Kincaid Urban Group. Verity was disbarred and faced federal charges. Kincaid's trial was set to be the biggest in the city's history. And Jonah Pell, seeing his only way out, took a witness protection deal, and he sang like a canary. 2 weeks later, the Calderone pastry cart opened in the wharf market. The line stretched all the way to the water. That night, I found Marco on the terrace, the same terrace where he had found me. The air was cool and clean. The storm was gone. He wasn't drinking coffee. He had a mug of hot cacao. I sat beside him, not on the cold stone, but in the chair next to him. I wasn't eating leftovers. I held a small plate. On it was a single, warm cinnamon cookie, fresh from my cart. He took it. He bit into it and his eyes closed. He smiled that rare, bright smile. "A very good investment," he said. I looked at him. The man they called a monster. The man who owned the shadows. The man who had started a war. Not for power or for money, but for me. He really was shocking. Not with a gun. By standing on someone's side. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below. Share your thoughts and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video. And if you really enjoyed it, please hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.